She is in so many ways responsible for my being here. Her name is Athleen Collins. She's a general Tricia Laurel. Tricia Laurel. Thank you. Here she is back. Oh, yes. And what can I say about my dear brother, Professor Martin Malcolm? My new friend and brother has been here 42 years of high quality service to this institution. He's your provost. His name is Brother Herman Berliner. Where is he? I don't know. He's here somewhere. And whoever son, Rita McKnight. My God. Give her a hand. Love you, love you, love you, love you. 32 years the pastor of historic Antioch Baptist Church, Reverend Marvin Bensley. Where is he? Where is he? There he is. There he is. There he is. Look at that young lady. I'm here to speak to young people especially. I'm old school, but I love new school. And I'm talking about a young leader headed in the BCP here at this Grand Institute. Her name is Angelica Jackson. Last but not least, another historic figure, First City Council from District 1. Her name is Sister Dorothy Goldsby. Where is she? Where is she? Thank you all for coming out tonight. You can see I'm in no rush, but I understand we got a debate coming. Well, at least I hope it's a debate. We don't need any more infomercials, do we? We need some serious critical exchange and serious critical reflection. And that's why I want to try to say something tonight that unsettles you. Because when you're talking about poverty, you're really talking about precious, priceless brothers and sisters of all colors who lack access to resources. You begin with their humanity. You begin with their connection to us as human beings. So I want to begin with line 38 of Plato's Apology. The unexamined life is not worth living. You know, the Greek actually says the unexamined life is not a life of the human. You know, our English word human derives from the Latin humando, which means burying. I like to remind professors of humanity. What they're really wrestling when I salute professors of humanity. I know I got the dear sister that does magnificent work on democracy and performance, Professor Morell, I think her name, and give her a hand as well. Humanity is talking about burial. What does it mean to be human? That's the starting point of any discussion, not just of poverty. But any form of xenophobia, it can be vicious legacies of white supremacy or male supremacy. It can be vicious legacies of anti-Jewish hatred, anti-Muslim hatred, anti-Arab hatred, or homophobia. Any ideology that loses sight of the humanity of human beings. To begin with what it means to be human is to raise the most terrifying question we can ever raise, and it's so rarely asked in a sustained manner in this culture of superficial spectacle obsessed with titillation and stimulation. No, we want critical reflection. We want Socratic energy. What does it mean to be a featherless, two-legged, linguistically conscious creature born between urine and feces? That's who we are. That's why I spend so much time with funk masters like George Clinton and Bootsy Collins. They remind us we all emerge in the funk. I am who I am because somebody loved me. You are who you are. Somebody loved you. And the love push that got you out is your starting point. And one day your body will be the culinary delight of terrestrial worms. That's funky too. The fundamental query, which is the most terrifying, is what kind of human being will you choose to be in your short trek from your mama's womb to tomb? That's what this institution is all about at its best. But the Greek's called paideia, P-A-I-D-E-I-A, which is deep education, not cheap schooling. Because deep education is about the formation of your attention. What are you going to attend to? Will it be issues of life and death and sadness and sorrow and joy, not just fleeting pleasures? Will it be issues of poor people and working people, or will it be just your attempt to gain access to some level of prosperity so you become well adjusted to injustice? Well, adapted to indifference. Oh, our dear brother Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel used to say, indifference is the one trait that makes the very angels weep. Turn your exactly, young brother. You understand what I'm talking about. To turn your back on people who are suffering, in pain, wrestling with social misery, rendering it invisible as if they do not count, as if they do not matter, as if their destiny is not inextricably interwoven with our destiny. But it's so easy to hold at arm's length those kinds of Socratic questions that connect to who we really are. What kind of human being you want to be? What kind of community are we really? What kind of nation are we really? What kind of species are we really, given the level of suffering of those of great French phenomenon called the wretched of the earth? Are we properly, appropriately, courageously attending to their plight and predicament? Not as victims, as human beings who may often be victimized, but who always have the capacity for fight back. Always have the capacity to straighten up their backs and take a stand for something bigger than them. Take a stand. Not just for some special interest group articulation, and we want to get to that when it comes to talking about poverty. Because you put a black face on poverty, and people think, oh, yeah, that's just a black affair, and black folk are only concerned about their special interest. No. We talk about the legacy of Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer. Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer were never concerned about this special interest group articulation. They wanted justice. They wanted fairness for everybody, even though it may begin on the chocolate side of town. On the chocolate side of town for so long, precisely because so many of us live in denial. Unemployment rate is 21% on the chocolate side. That's normal. If 21% unemployment on the vanilla side, uh-oh, now we got a problem of unemployment. Oh, 1 out of 3 young brothers on the chocolate side are locked into the prison industrial complex, the new Jim Crow. That's the norm. Oh, if it migrates over to the vanilla side, then we got a major problem with the new Jim Crow. We get a town conference every week. Of course, there's the issue of class. Oh, if the black middle class young folk were going to prison at the same level as black poor brothers and sisters, Brother Jamal and Letitia on the block, we'd have a different kind of black leadership, different kind of black church ministry, different kind of black civic institutional practice. So the issue of poverty is one that wrestles with each and every one of us in terms of what kind of person will we choose to be, what kind of vision, what kind of virtues, what kind of values do we really have? Or do we just want to be honest about it? Maybe we just don't give a damn. You know, Brother West, that's played out. That's that 1960s rhetoric about public interest and common good. It's all about me. I'm an isolated ego trying to get over, obsessed with the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. That's a beginning description of a lot of activity on Wall Street in the last few years. Criminal behavior, insider trading, market manipulation, predatory lending. How many go to jail? Oh, not yet. Not one yet. Let a poor white brother in Appalachia get caught with a crack bag, or let a poor brown, or let a poor black, or poor red sister get caught on a reservation. Drugs, possession, space jail, differential treatment. Do we have the courage? This is what I want to focus on the young folk. Courage. You've got to make paideia and your deep education, a sight, not only will you gain access to sophisticated skills for analysis, access to that magnificent data and evidence that our brother trotted out, but courage, shatter the conformity, shatter the complacency, shatter the complicity to various structures and institutions, generate unequal results, generate differential treatment. And right now we're living in a moment where the relative paucity of sustained courage at the level of organizing and mobilizing to highlight the suffering. And I come from a tradition that says the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. How could it be that 1% of the population owns 42% of the wealth, and yet 21% of our precious children of all colors live in poverty in the richest nation in the history of the world? Where's the moral outrage? Where's the righteous indignation? Where's the holy anger? You would think there'd be organizations coming out of our midst. Sleepwalking sets in. It's a culture of weapons of mass distraction. Dumb down public discourse. Corporate media. One channel PowerPoints from Romney campaign, the other channel PowerPoint from the Obama administration. Neither one of them saying a mumbling word about poverty. So far, 0.2% of the coverage of the discourse, of the reflection in public life during this campaign has been about poverty. The shameful silence. People will look back decades from now. Billions of dollars spent on a campaign, not just presidential campaign, congressional. And yet, fellow citizens of all colors wrestling with stagnating wages, declining wages. Profits were still going up. Billions of dollars being made in a casino-like activity on Wall Street, little of it linked to public value or public good going into private pockets. And the schools, dilapidated. You all know about the Chicago strike that just took place. 684 public schools, 200 nurses for 684 schools. 684 public schools. 1 out of 4 of the schools have arts and music programs. And we wonder why the magnificent younger generation generates folk who don't always sing in pitch. I'm old school. Aretha hit the notes. Luther hit it. Donnie Hathaway hit it. Curtis Mayfield hit it. Thomas Howard hit it. James Brown hit it. Donald Simpson hit it. Richard Ashford hit it. I'm working on Usher. No, I'm just saying. That brother too. We wonder why they can't play instruments. Wonder why they got to use technology in order to generate melody and harmony and tempo. They got the same talent my generation had. This is for poor and working class brothers and sisters. America is #1 in the world in education for the precious 1% of our young people. See, I believe every human being is precious. I don't care what percent they're in. But I believe in fighting against social forms of evil. And by evil, I mean unjustified suffering. Unmerited pain. It's only when you introduce poverty that America becomes 23 in math, 13 in science, and yet Finland #1 across the board. 97% of their teachers unionized, so it could be teachers' unions. That's very important these days, given the bashing of our precious teachers, catching hell, caretakers of the younger generation, as if somehow they can overcome the poverty, overcome the bullets flowing, overcome the drugs flowing in the poor community. Where do the drugs come from? Where do the guns come from? come from those communities. Not at all. It's socially neglected, economically abandoned communities with intense police surveillance. Stop and frisk is just the peak of an iceberg in terms of trying to ensure that you criminalize a whole generation of poor people, not just black and brown, but disproportionately chocolate youth. And they raise the question, Burl Flatt, Donny Hathaway raised in the early 70s, where is the love? Question that Marvin Gaye raised is, what's going on? Who really cares about me? Mother's overworked and underpaid. My father's unemployed, sometimes drifting. I look at popular discourse and I see this obsession with the lives of the rich and famous, lives of pseudo celebrities, most of them, if not significant numbers of them, just famous for being famous. Kardashian is a nice job. God bless my sister, but she needs a little invisibility. And the personal attack, she's the symbol of a larger culture that includes all of us. It would reinforce spectatorship rather than participation. To be a fan rather than an activist. Socratic reflection. Now, I tell the students in my classes over the years, various institutions, I'm now blessed to be at Union Theological Seminary where I started my career 35 years ago. Each time a student enters my class, and they know sooner or later we're going to talk about justice and fairness, link to poverty, empire, xenophobia. I said, it's so good to have you in here. You have come here to learn how to die. Look at me, brother, I hadn't planned on this. I thought I was just getting my degree and taking a course on the way. Graduation. No, you learning how to die. Because to muster the courage to critically examine your assumptions and presuppositions, way to death, because when you give up certain prejudices and presuppositions and assumptions, that is a form of death. And there is no maturity, there's no growth, there's no development without letting certain prejudices go, letting certain presuppositions go, broadening your critical horizons, reading the powerful text. It could be Shakespeare's Hamlet, it could be Toni Morrison's Beloved, and taking the text and throwing it against the wall and saying, I can't take it. It has completely pulled the rug from under my view of the world. That's called education. You're going to have to completely recast how you look at the world. And for all of us growing up in a mainstream of American civilization that specializes in denial, it specializes in evading. It specializes in dodging the most fundamental questions and the most fundamental challenges. That's why, again, you will hear over and over again tonight, I'm sure. There is no problem America cannot solve. We Americans cannot solve. There's no limits that can hold us. There's no constraints that can be imposed upon us because we are Americans. That's a lie. Death. Work that one out. Dread. Despair. Catastrophe is always on its way to your house. Don't think that somehow you're going to slide through history and not have to deal with the iron laws of history, which means that in the end you're going to reap what you sow. Chickens will come home to roost. What's in the water will come out in the rinse. Look at your own history, America. You got a U.S. Constitution, no reference to the institution of slavery. End up fighting the Civil War with institutions not invoked in your Constitution. 750 precious human beings dead, each one of them precious. Why? Because you got social death in your midst. 22% of the inhabitants of the 13 colonies are enslaved Africans whose labor generates the wealth, the precondition for your democracy, and you wouldn't have the democracy if you hadn't mistreated our indigenous brothers and sisters. They don't have to be in the room for us to be sensitive about their suffering. Denial! Sooner or later, that reality is going to pierce, just like the American Hamlet, Black Dubois, Tennessee Williams, the streetcar named Desire. Tennessee Williams, of course, is the blues man from the vanilla side of town. Because the blues is not a function of pigmentation, it's a function of attention, orientation, critical reflection. You got millions of Negroes sleepwalking this very moment. Don't even know they are blues people. They got the blues, but they don't only have blues people. Because when you're a blues people, you got the blues, but you got something to fight back. You can look the catastrophe in the face and still straighten up with a smile and style and allow compassion to flow and say, I'm not going to allow this misery to have the last word, because I come from a blues people. But oh, if you have the blues and you can't take it and your back is weak and you're already complicitous, either on the way to the crack house or you want to be head up. You give it up. But like too many slices of the middle class in America, you sell out. Oh, yeah, just show me what the highest bidder is, because in America, everything's for sale. Everybody's for sale. Just give me a job. Give me visibility. Give me publicity. Ooh, I can't wait to be a celebrity. Just give me some cash. And I will no longer be fundamentally committed to justice and fairness, because everybody will look at me like I'm some peacock. I say, oh, peacock, right? Because they can't fly. Be an eagle. Soar and keep track of the folk below. Don't tell me about your breakthrough at the top. What about those still stuck in the basement? That's the tradition of a blues people that's been Socratic on the one hand, but also allowed flow the great legacy of Jerusalem, our Jewish brothers and sisters. Gift to humanity. Prophetic tradition, a battalion of prophetic voices of Isaiah and Micah and Amos and others, saying to be human is to spread loving kindness to the orphan, the widow, the fatherless, the motherless, those on the margin, the stranger. And if you take that seriously, it's about charity and philanthropy. It's about to be human means let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty. In America, it's been usually those who look at the country through the lens of poor people, through the lens of working people, through the lens of those who are always on the margins in the mainstream dialogue. No accident when you read the newspaper, you got a business page but no labor page. How do you have a business and no labor? There used to be a labor page, but there was a stronger labor movement. But no, now workers are just these manipulable objects, trying to ensure that you race to the bottom, cheapest labor. Go to India, go to China, NAFTA, go to Mexico, NAFTA on steroids. The Trans-Pacific Partnership Treaty just signed. Big profits at the top. Child labor sometimes involved, because it's just a matter of big money. I hope they do raise the question to Brother Romney tonight. Could you tell us something about those offshore havens that you have? Tell us something about 1 out of 4 corporations who don't pay 1 penny of income tax, but hard-working Americans of all colors paying 21, 25, 30% of their income tax. Tell us something about GE. Not 1 penny. Mr. Obama, you appointed the CEO of GE to deal with jobs and competitiveness, but his own institution didn't pay a penny of taxes. That's not a wise choice, brother. But does it reveal your own guilt? Toward Wall Street mediated with Brother Tim Geithner and so many others. That's the kind of question I would like to hear tonight. But I was born that night, but not last night. I don't hold my breath. But Thank God, in Hofstra, we can just engage in what we call parrhesia, line 24a in Plato's Apology, where Socrates said, I'm going to my death because of my unpopularity. Parrhesia, plain speech, frank speech, fearless speech, unintimidated speech, a speech that you're willing to live for and die for. Oh, we need so much more of that kind of speech in America. Not just on the stage. We need it in the musical theater. We need it in the music. Thank God for Lupe Fiasco and the other. Brother Ali, Eric Bruce Springsteen, Dylan and the other. Speech that forces us to engage in Socratic reflection. And not only in the classroom, can be on the street if you have the courage to do it. If you don't want to just be successful, but rather really want to be great. And greatness has to do with the quality of your service to others and the depth of your love for those who often are so loveless. And it's not a paternalistic act. It's a human connection and a human bond. And yet, this tradition that I'm talking about, when it's weak and feeble, the issues it addresses become more and more invisible. Now, I do salute the Occupy movement or the Occupy motion or the Occupy movement. Great issue of wealth inequality connected to poverty, no doubt. Subject to ridicule and caricature. People making jokes about it. As if the lives of working people and poor people is something that can be cast as an object of farcical analysis. When will poor and working people really wake up? And when they do wake up, will there be persons in place linked to the legacy of Dorothy Day, Philip Barrett, Harry Magdalf, Paul Swedes, Michael Swedes, down there, Ronald Woods, that thing. We want to talk about justice, not revenge. We want to talk about compassion and love, not hatred and xenophobia. And it's very difficult for this kind of message to take root. Now, I was blessed, many of you know, travel the country, Brother Tab Smiley. You all know Brother Tab Smiley's television shows, radio shows, and so forth. I'm a part to 18 cities, 7 days, all through the Midwest and the South, Mississippi, Tennessee, variety of other cities. Came back from Poverty Tour 2.0 and battleground states, saying we want to ensure there's a discussion about poverty. We already called for eradication of poverty as the first business of the next president, calling for a national conference. And a national conference not inviting me and others. I don't need to be there. I got enough platform. But those who devoted their lives to trying to understand the sources of poverty and poor people themselves, raising their voices, accenting their capacities and their abilities, so that they're not viewed as just people who make bad choices and bad judgments. People that are somehow involved in just pathological behavior. Because anytime I hear that description, I think immediately of Wall Street bankers. Oh, that was a bad choice, that was a bad judgment. Ooh, some of that's pathological. You think you're going to get away with that? Oh, you've been getting away with that for year after year after year. I don't say this out of hatred. Not at all. I'm a Christian. I'm trying to love everybody, but I know I can't do it on my own. Need a little grace. But I'm not dehumanizing either. I'm talking about the dehumanizing effects of greed and arrogance and indifference. One wonders when a serious public discussion, when a serious social movement will emerge that connects our talk about poverty to the increasing oligarchic and plutocratic character of our economy, who talks about global capitalism and the various ways in which elites across national boundaries are involved in coordinated activities of reshaping the globe in their own interest, with environmental catastrophe looming, with social catastrophe looming, and with moral and spiritual catastrophe looming. Is it an accident that we in the United States now live in the most unequal of industrial societies, with the highest levels, not just of infant mortality, not just with homicide, not just with mass incarceration, disproportionately black, brown, and poor white, but also with depression? I saw this movie the other day, a couple months ago, called The Social Network. The New York Times said, "Oh, don't miss it. It's about the triumph of the human spirit." I said, "Well, I gotta check this out. Anytime I talk about triumph of the human spirit, must be Chekhov or something. I've been checking. On front row, popcorn and all. What do I witness? Obsession with money, money, money. Insecure male ego can't deal with woman's inequality. BITCH written on the card in order to make money to prove to the young woman that she made a mistake because she didn't take him out. I did not take out to kill, take him out during social activity. And I said to myself, this exemplifies spiritual malnutrition. There's an emptiness of the soul. All the material toys in the world, all the quest for male patriarchal status, vis-a-vis women in the world, think that that's going to generate some joy, as if we don't even know the difference between joy and pleasure. Know the difference between spiritual maturity and moral constipation. You have a sense of what's right, it just stuck in and won't flow. What? Projection of a future, of a civilization that has such potential, now more and more unrealized. So much talent wasted. You would think our political system would kick in. It's already dominated with big money, big banks, big corporations, more and more citizens feeling relatively impotent. What can I really do? Candidates, too often in both parties, tied to big money. To be a politician these days means what? Major in fundraising. Make sure the money's flowing. Mr. Romney, how you doing? I'm checking my money. Mr. Obama, how you doing? Checking my money. Wall Street helped you out, Mr. Obama, last time. Now they turned against you. Yeah, I know. I was loyal to them, but they haven't been loyal to me. And you need money for television ads, but what quality do we really have? Polarizing and paralyzing, and it chokes the collective will. I traveled America for the last 35 years. I see human beings with tremendous imagination and intelligence, tremendous insight, but somehow when I look at our candidates, I say, I hear what you said here. Is this the best we can do? I said, oh, Brother West, Obama's brilliant, charismatic. Yes, he is, and I'm glad about that. Good to see a black brother brilliant and charismatic. But a black brother who's brilliant and charismatic doesn't get me excited because I grew up with Negroes who were brilliant and charismatic. That's not news for me. I don't need to prove anything to my white brothers and sisters. They don't constitute the source of authority for me. They don't constitute the gaze through which I view the world. For everybody concerned about what black people look like in front of the white mainstream. No, I want to know what kind of courage do they have. I want to know what kind of truths they're willing to speak. I want to know what kind of price they're willing to pay. I want to know whether they're talking about issues that have not been talked about before. What do you have to say Marx was shaped, Stokely Carmichael was shaped, a white brother from gut bucket Jim Crow, Tennessee. His cousin, member of the Ku Klux Klan, burned down Highland every 3 years. He got to build it back up again. But it was an interracial activity. Oh, that's the kind of white brother. Oh, yes. Indeed, indeed. And I'm not saying that we don't have some black folks. I know that's my dear sister and others. Cutting against the grain. She knows better than us in historically that she is. What price she has to pay. She bears that kind of witness. It speaks that kind of truth. And sometimes black folks themselves don't understand. But never forget, when Martin King was shot down like a dog in Memphis, April the 4th, 1968, 72% of Americans disapproved of him, and 55% of black people disapproved of Martin because he was drawing the connection between poverty, militarism, xenophobia, and materialism, and the culture of superficial spectacle. And they said, Mark, we thought in fact that you were head of a civil rights movement. Are you now moving to human rights? He said, I was always concerned about human rights, that black people have always been human. They called it a civil rights because they were concerned about us being included in the nation state. But I'm concerned about those babies in Vietnam too. And I'm concerned about those Latinos being mistreated when it comes to our immigration. And I'm concerned about Jewish representation when they sit on my anti-Semitic vote. I'm concerned about the stereotypes of Muslims and Arab brothers and sisters too. Oh, we didn't understand you, Mark. We thought that you were more focused. What did Martin say when he stood there in Riverside Church looking for 1960? Tears flowing. He said, you never understood me. You don't know me. You had a caricature of me. I wasn't trying to be popular. Trying to be faithful. Wasn't trying to be celebrity, trying to be true to my call. Young people, wrestle with your call in a Socratic and prophetic way. Critical reflection, bearing witness to love, justice, and what love looks like in public. So bearing witness to justice. Don't just be concerned about your career. Wrestle with your call. Not just your profession, but your vocation. Come from a tradition that says lift every voice. Every voice. Poor people, working people, middle class, upper middle class, well-to-do voice. Lift every voice. But oh, my precious young folk, I go into various studios all across the nation. I come and I say, I see too many copies and not enough original. Too many young folk just want to fit in and be a copy in order to be successful, rather than being a misfit and being mild-adjusted to injustice, mild-adjusted to indifference. How come you not imitating? I don't want to be an imitation. I want to be a creation. I don't want to be mainstream and streamlined in order to help my career. I want to bear witness to be true to my calling, and wherever I end up is fine with me because I'm trying to be a certain kind of human being with integrity and magnanimity, even if I'm unpopular. Oh yes. And if that kind of sensibility is inculcated in the younger generation, we'll lose our democracy. We'll lose our freedom. The President signed the bill in December, the National Defense Authorization Act. Now has the power to detain any citizen without trial, assassinate an American citizen if they are defined as being over against American security. That's authoritarian. 1980s, I was in deep solidarity with a magnificent black man in jail called Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was on the American terrorist list for over 20 years. Does that mean my association with the ANC and Nelson Mandela means that somehow I'm connected with a terrorist organization? Yes. between me being in solidarity with my brothers and sisters in South Africa dealing with a terroristic system called apartheid, no matter what the State Department defines that movement to be. That's the kind of concern we need to have. Not in order to get shot, even though some of us must die. I don't mind, I should have been dead too. Lived a long time for a long time. But I don't suggest that you won't. There's some earlier steps in parts of organization, structures, prophetic mosques, prophetic synagogues, prophetic churches, prophetic temples, trade unions, that accent this issue of poverty. Connected with what Mary Wright Edelman has been doing, and her beloved husband Peter Edelman, in this wonderful book on poverty. Be part of the awakening. Support the journalists like Amy Goodman and the others, Democracy Now! We're able to get a different perspective from the vantage point of poor and working people. If you turn on your radio, especially in the morning, try to get something that's illuminating and informative. We won't go into what the alternative is. That's the challenge. And that's why I'm so very blessed to be here tonight. And that's why I'm eager to learn and listen from each and every one of you. I'll start on a Socratic note. I want to end on a blue note. But as I said before, the blues is about catastrophe. Ralph Waldo Ellison says the blues is a personal catastrophe, chronicle of an autobiographical catastrophe, lyrically expressed. Lyric, because sometimes all you can do is sing a song. Stephen King said, no. Loves me but my mom, and she might be driving too. That's what it is. That's catastrophic. That's like Antigone. Socratic is classic. Every force in the world against you, and the one force you thought you could depend on, like pudding. But when B.B. King sings that song, he's got a smile on his face. He does it with style, and a little help from Lucille. And he has a whole tradition behind him of folk who've been wrestling with catastrophe, 244 years of slavery, catastrophe, American Jim Crow, American terrorism, every 3 days for over 50 years, a black male, a female, a baby hanging from some tree, the strange fruit the southern trees bear that the great Billie Holiday sang about, and the Jewish brother Maripol wrote the lyrics. That's catastrophic. And my hunch is if I had time tonight, I could walk some streets in Hempstead, and I would see catastrophe. Education, I went to the black section of town. I'll probably also see too much self-violation and self-disrespect because there's still too much white supremacy inside of black people, not thinking highly enough of ourselves, thinking we have the wrong hips and lips and noses, thinking we're less intelligent and less beautiful, not taking our back from the self-respect and self-confidence so that you can see white supremacy operating with white brothers and sisters not even around. That's what history does to you. It deposits that into the depths of your soul. Folk don't even have to be there for you to walk around deferential and scratching with it, don't hit you laughing when it ain't fun. You'll never be able to have wrestling with poverty unless you shatter that kind of sleepwalking. Yes. And in the end, we're going to have to all do it together. All do it as human beings, as American citizens, as courageous, visionary, prophetic, Socratic, and blues-like people. Do you see the catastrophe? I see it now. I didn't see it before. Clear now. The awakening is taking place. Echoes of that first line of Henry David Thoreau's Walden. What can I do to awake my neighbors from their sleepwalking? I'm going to the barn. Oh, we went to Henry David Thoreau. We understand. We want to shatter that too. There's a whole lot of ways to do it. Artists, activists, pharmacists, doctors, lawyers, professors, preachers, rabbis, ministers across the board. Relative to the calling, shattering the sleepwalking, waking up, coming together, struggling together, recognizing no one of against the very thing inside of us as we are outside of us. I struggle with the white supremacy inside of me, male supremacy inside of me, class arrogance inside of me, American haughtiness inside of me every day. That's what it means to learn how to die, to kill it, murder it, and allow positive, creative, courageous energy to come forward. So when we interact with one another, we can empower, we can enable, we can actually make a difference. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cornel West, for bearing witness to love and justice. We do have time for questions, about 30 minutes of questions. Per what Ms. Collins was saying, we prefer students to come up first. We'll alternate between sides of the aisle, so we'll start with the right side, so please don't be shy and come up and ask your question. Come on up.
Well, I'm honored to ask first. My name is Liam Stevens. It's been such an honor to hear you speak. I would like to ask you about something a little off topic. A few months ago, I was privileged to go hear the philosopher Slavoj Žižek speak in Manhattan. And I would say his thinking is becoming something a bit apocalyptic. And it's something that is probably part of the ideology of our time. That you see people on the right talking about apocalypse, saying, you know, as soon as Obama comes to the White House, suddenly he's the Antichrist and things are falling apart. I wonder if you just have anything to say about the people who would say there's not a place for activism anymore and that it's better to step back and just watch the world burn.
Well, I would ask them when the fire gets to their mama's house. When that fire hits your baby, is that what you gonna do? Just stand there and watch the fire burn with your baby right there? If so, Key Sweat moment, something just ain't right. You know what I mean? And of course, I had wonderful debates with other folks. I keep my dear brother who had it for a number of times. He's very hard. And I have a love for him. He's a very good philosopher. Of course, he does believe in agency. He's got his own certain version of progressive left-wing agency and so on. He just wants to be very clear that the forces that we're up against are Goliath-like, and he's absolutely right. But then, of course, as I said before, I come from a tradition when the first slave got off the slave ship. It was Goliath-like. It's been like that ever since for the last folk that produced me. And so nothing new. Nothing new at all. I mean, it's like 9/11. White brothers, oh my God, we're unsafe, unprotected, subject to random violence, and hated for who we are. That sounds like people like it now. Unsafe, unprotected, subject to random violence, hated for who you are. What's new? Been terrorized, traumatized, stigmatized for 400 years. What's new? Oh, Brother West, I see your point. Yeah. Come on, learn something. On intimate terms, so that in that sense, I think he's capturing rightly the relative decline of the American empire. There's no doubt about that. Rise of China, India, Brazil, so Latin America began to merge. He's rightly touching on the relative cultural decay that I talked about in terms of superficial spectacle, addiction, and so forth and so on. And political paralysis. There's no doubt about that. We live in a broken political system. That's a fact. We'll see it manifest in part in the debate, even though we still must make choices. And I think those choices are still very important. And I make my own choice in terms of Brother Barack vis-a-vis Mitt Romney. But I mean, that's not a fundamental choice for me, because the system itself is already in such a crisis. But the response has to be one of acknowledging the catastrophe, which he does. And that puts a big book on the end times of it. He's got some fascinating formulation. But it's the bounce back. And the bounce back is not a question of winning overnight. I mean, if you have a push button mentality looking for an overnight panacea, then that kind of watching it collapse might be attractive to you. But if you're already in the mess, remember I began to talk about the funk, right? If you're already in the funk, then the question is, how do you go negotiate yourself and humanity in that funk? And there's no open space. We all are in space and time together. Now, there is a chance that, nuclear catastrophe can hit, and then we all go and just left to the roaches. That's a possibility. That's been a possibility for decades now. That's real. We fight against it. So then I think the question is, one should never be cheaply optimistic. One should never be pessimistic in a paralyzing form. One should be a prisoner of hope. And the prisoner of hope says, I will keep thinking, reflecting, acting, loving, laughing, like Curtis Mayfield said. Just keep on pushing. You gotta keep on moving. You gotta keep on fighting. Then you're down. Thank you so very much.
How you doing, Mr. West?
Good to see you.
I'm Isaiah Washington.
Yeah. So I told you about that first name you got.
Yeah.
Oh, you are that prophetic.
My question, we live in a time, we talk about sleepwalking, and we live in a time where media affects us very heavily, and it seems that, like you said, more people rather fit in than rather be misfits, and actually have that courage. But what would you suggest how we get that courage? What will provoke that courage in today's time? Since we see these rappers and actresses, and like you said, Kim Kardashian with all this nonsense.
We pray for this sister, but she doesn't need to be set straight.
But what would you say to how should we provoke that courageousness that the teens, we can actually wake up and be active in our communities?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. The wonderful line in the Critique of Pure Reason where he says, examples are the go-kart of judgment. Examples. Now, in the black tradition, we usually say people would rather see sermons than hear them. It's by your life, your practice, your deeds, your truth-telling, your sacrifice, and your death. That's how you do it. And if you don't have enough folk willing to exemplify it and embody it, then you lose. I mean, that's part of the paradox of Socrates, right? That he disavows the very wisdom that he embodies. He says he knows more than anybody else besides because he knows nothing. Well, you figure he got to know something because he is somebody in his life. He embodies it, he enacts it. But he's humility. I really don't know anything. No, that's not true, Socrates. Plato spent his whole life making the world safe. It's the legacy of Socrates. Some of us doing that. Martin King, Fannie Lou Hamer. Partly the way Jay-Z was trying to do that for Biggie up until recently. Oh, he's in a real tizzy now, right? Praying for that brother. He was based on one of the greatest geniuses of hip-hop. Truth-telling, lyrical genius. Flawed, but unbelievable pioneer. But he never had the level of success as this other genius, lyrical genius named Jay-Z. Now, what you gonna do with your success, Jay-Z? What you gonna do with it? How you gonna use it? I won't just be a peacock, a mogul. Look at me. No, you want to be able to connect on the ground. So whatever ventures you're a part of, poor people and working people are at the center. Don't displace them, don't move them out. Nobody wanted to talk about that what I did, Brother JC. And I love that brother too. You understand too, that's so good, you know. But each one of us needs to be answerable and accountable to something bigger than us. That's what it's all about, and we help each other out. I was drifting in that direction. I want him to sing a song about me. Brother West, see that temptation and seduction set me in. Contrary to what you were talking about, glad you're concerned about me, JC. Let's work it out together. Because in the end, we still together. Even when we disagree. But by example, what I had when I was coming along, my dear brother, in the 60s and 70s, I could look around and I could see hundreds of folk who were willing to tell the truth and were willing to live and die. Martin Luther King Jr. was the peak of an iceberg. I just buried my pastor yesterday. 51 years ago, he baptized me. He was a magnificent human being. His building fund was his hammer. He had a prison ministry that was bigger than his building fund. Wouldn't allow any anniversary because he didn't want to pad his pocket with people's hard-earned money. Wouldn't allow the church to buy him a house. Is that the case these days? Hell no. Go to some of these churches and see an ATM before you see a cross. Where's the love? Where's the sacrifice? Where's the mega church? Where's the mega justice? You got a mega church. Where's the mega love? Where's the mega courage? You got mega cash flowing. That's example. And you're always going to be a critical minority. It's never going to be everybody's in on it. But it's going to be bigger than it is now. And that's what it was in the 60s and 70s. Go right ahead.
Thank you for your talk, Dr. West.
Thank you.
And I appreciate your shout out to my favorite rapper, Lupe Fiasco.
Oh,
I am the president of the Libertarian group on campus. And while we agree on the drug laws and stop and frisk and the empire that we are growing, we kind of disagree on economic issues. And you said that poverty should be the number one issue for the next president, whether that is Mr. Romney or Mr. Obama. So I'm just asking some policy proposals that you have, some solid things that you would like the next president to kind of embark on in regards to policy about the poor. Thank you for a great speech.
Oh, thank you as well. Let me just say this much, brother, that I have very deep libertarian sensibilities when it comes to rights and liberties of everybody. We fight for people's right to be wrong. Brother Rush Limbaugh has a right to make a fool of himself. His standards characterization needs to be rendered accountable. In the same way that many of my leftist comrades, well, I might not agree with everything, but they have a right for their analysis and so on. This issue of rights, that's why I went to the National Defense Office. We're very connected to libertarians in that regard. The problem historically of libertarians is oftentimes they have to come strongly in defense of the rights of peoples of color, indigenous peoples, and so forth and so on. Now, that's different in your generation, but as you know, the history of your tradition is one that has been too narrow in that regard. But proposals, I think, if we bring together best minds and poor people, there will be certain kinds of things, a consensus, that will produce a consensus. There has to be massive investment, public and private. Public and private. Jobs with a living wage. I didn't just say jobs. 40% of the jobs are stimulus, low wage. 40% of the jobs these days, low wage. Jobs with a living wage. Massive investment in not just education, but ensuring that the educational policy connects parents, young people, teachers with honor, administrators, and resources. Connected to the environment outside of the school. Fewer bullets, decent housing, so forth. That's the beginning. But once we make it a priority, I don't really think there's one set of propositions. There's going to be a number of them. Because when demos come together, there's so many different ways of thinking about this that I can't conceive of. And it's going to have to be cross-political and ideological lines. That conservative brothers and sisters, for example, who often have a sensitivity toward poor people, but it's in the form of charity. You can go to conservative churches, they give massive amounts of money, philanthropy. That's wonderful, but it's not just. It's not structural, it's not institutional. Once you get that kind of energy manifest in an institutional way, you end up with a massive anti-poverty, now program, anti-poverty orientation. So we had jobs with a living wage, we wouldn't need a lot of these social programs. See what I mean? So that's the beginning of the stuff. I appreciate it.
I'm Ashwaz. I just want to thank you for your speech. My name is Alexander Leach. And in reflecting off of a lot of things that you said tonight about race relations and things of that nature, and as you just said about rights being an institution of federal protection, I am a gay male, and I would say from that perspective, one of the largest demographics that is not necessarily prejudiced, but is not necessarily for the rights of the gay minority would be black demographic, as well as the Christian right demographic. Yeah. And when you talk about, you know, grassroots and populist movement for social justice and for improvement of the economy and just the humanistic aspects of our nation, I'm curious how it is that, you know, you would band those people together, because so often the people that, you know, devout Christians that espouse those beliefs tend to actually use them in a different sense and in-group themselves together in opposition to the people that violate their beliefs and believe that that should be the governmental policy in place of separation of church and state.
I don't appreciate that question. It's a complicated one because there's so many different elements and dimensions to it. But let me say this directly to you, though, that what I was talking about was both, first and foremost, a defense of your humanity, love and compassion for you as a human being and as a gay brother. And then third, at the level of citizenship, to ensure you have full-scale citizens' rights on each one of those levels. If we go back and say, okay, well, let's look at some of the opposition. I come out of the black church tradition, right? And there's no doubt that there's large numbers of folks that say the black church, like in so many other churches, that are highly suspicious of any talk about gay and lesbian activity because they see instances in their biblical scripture that lead them to believe that in fact this is something that's unacceptable. So then of course I myself have to engage them. And I said, well, I noticed the Bible says slaves be obedient to your master. Black folk got around that one pretty good. Slave insurrection, abolitionism, and so forth. Also, there's moments in the biblical text that says people and women ought not to make a loud noise in church. Well, my church violates that every Sunday. Every Sunday. And then for me, I am Christocentric, which is to say that I focus on Jesus, who didn't say a mumbling word about gays and lesbians. You would have thought if it was such a cutting issue for him, he would have said something. So then we engage in theological discussion. I have dear brothers and sisters who radically disagree with me. Brother West, you out there with the gay brothers and lesbian sisters, you know that's a sin, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. No, let's argue. I think you're wrong. I think in fact when you look at Old Testament, Paul, vis-a-vis Jesus, it's a different result. But we argue back and forth. In that regard, we still love each other. Black churches still produce a magnificent human beings in a variety of different ways. But I think in the end, all three of those propositions, defense of humanity, serious talk about love, and full-scale citizen rights. And it's the third that has to do with separation of church, mosque, synagogue, and state. Yet people still do have a right to their own views in that regard, back to the libertarian issue. And there's going to be persons who do not give up on that. And therefore we have to learn how to live with them to ensure that they don't engage in injurious harm to persons who are in vulnerable positions. But that's the beginning of an answer to your question, though. You stay strong, brother.
You used the word democracy several times during your lecture.
Yeah.
Do you still believe we live in a democracy and not a plutocracy? And if you do, when can we get back to being a democracy? How long do you think it's going to take?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. You know, I mean, it's true that when we talk about democracy, we're not talking about pure ideal types. We're always talking about degrees and gradations. And I do think that plutocracy has set in. Big money is now very much in the driver's seat. Big money is mighty. But because of people's voices still being raised, big money is not almighty. Which means that there are still Bernie Sanders and Steve Cohen from Memphis, and there's still the Gerards from Ohio, persons who have some commitment to the demos as opposed to just the big money. So it's not, I don't think it's a matter of completely just either or. It's a matter of degrees and gradation. I think the democratic elements still at work in our democracy. So we're not yet a full-scale autocratic or authoritarian regime. That's beautiful, only because people are still fighting. America's Civil Liberties Union still fighting. Trade unions still fighting. NAACP, what I mentioned, still fighting. Democratic elements. But we have strong plutocratic and oligarchic elements that are at work. And then, of course, we've got the racist and sexist and anti-Semitic and anti-Arab ones as well. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a mixture. It's a mixture in this sense. But the plutocratic tendencies are dominant at the moment over both parties, and that's what is frightening. That's why fight back is so very important. Now, if democracy had been completely shut down, as soon as I finished my speech, I would have been dragged off. I would have waved to y'all and said, "Pray for me again." But those rights and liberties are still very precious, even given the plutocratic tendencies. That makes it very, very different than a full-scale authoritarian regime with a plutocratic elite running things. So it's a mixture. The conflict is taking place, but we have been losing that conflict. The democratic forces have been losing the battle with the plutocratic forces, but we still have certain rights and liberties, and we still have very, very limited voice that we can raise. Yeah. Hold on. Oh, we got a long time.
We've got about five more minutes for questions.
What time is the quote-unquote debate?
Debates at 9 o'clock, but we also have the book signing that we want to give you a little bit of time for.
Well, maybe we can skip the book signing and just have a question. Oh, I try to sign something after because I wouldn't want to take time from the demos' voice just to sign my book. But is that fair, brother? What do you think, brother?
Though I would encourage people to check out some of the community partnerships that are working on. We want to get people from the awareness to action for social justice and poverty alleviation on a local level. So while we can have more questions, we do want you to go and check out the table on the left in the lobby and get plugged in and start promoting justice, social justice every day.
Go to the little table before you get to my book. If you never get to my book, that's fine. That's what
Hi, Mr. West, I just wanted to tell you that I'm thankful that you're here and you're an amazing speaker and a lot of stuff. But anyway, that's my question. As a young musician, and there are a lot of them here and all over, I think that it's really difficult for them to be independent about their ideas and stuff like that. And I feel like that the ones that get noticed are the ones that support the ignorance going around in the government and socialism and stuff like that. So is there any advice that you could give to us as young musicians how to hold our own and still go out there, but yet we're singing with silent ears? So how do we expect to be listened to?
There's one thing, you want to band together with those of you who have this kind of vision and courage to encourage one another. And you want to be in conversation with the voices of the dead. which means you want to look at the lives of Curtis Mayfield. How can he write, we're a winner and no radio station would play it, but it still remains a classic to this day? We had friends like Jerry Butler who loved it. He told him not to get discouraged, not to get down and out. Sly Stone, he wrote Stand, Everyday People. How did he sustain himself for that amount of time? And he got some problems later, but for that amount of time, he had friends like both Bobby Womack and the others that came and helped support him. You see what I mean? You've got to have a network. You want friends, comrades, supporters, also your family as well. But you have to have some network. And I think Lupe is somebody who is struggling, trying to get his network deeper. He's trying to speak some truth to some of the young brothers in Chicago who's out of control. And he needs that kind of support. By support, I don't mean just buy his record, even though that's a decent thing to do. But also support by speaking the truth among your friends so people can understand what it means to be a conscious rapper. The Talib Kweli's and Mos Def's and others who've been at it for so long. How have they been able to do it? Warren Reeball, who's a Nina Simone. Reeball, who's a Max Roach, who wrote Freedom Sweet, his then wife, Abby Lincoln. How did they sustain themselves? Well, they had networks. And as artists, that is so very important. Because those networks allow you to preserve your voice, cultivate your voice, but you can't do that unless it's bouncing off the voice of others. Voices of the dead and voices of the quick. Good luck in your work. How you doing, my brother? Good to see you.
My pleasure to see you. Is there only one question? What are you willing to do?
What are we willing to do?
What is the body willing to do to make a change? Our ancestors died for us. So what is everybody willing to do to make that change? Revolution is hard, and it could be messy. So what is everybody willing to do to make this change? We're in a really problem here. If you could explain to them the huge problems going on right now, we're about to be devastated like a fourth or fifth world country. They can recognize.
The economic
Professor Moore.
Richard Wolf's book, Democracy at Work, another important text to look at. I mentioned Brother Michael Sweet's work as well, from Stony Brook was here. I think when I talk about what kind of human being you choose to be, your question is a version of that question. And it can only be answered by each individual.
Exactly. What are you all willing to do to make this change? That's the only question you have to answer to yourself, to your heart, to your soul, to your family, to your grandchildren, etc. Something has to be done.
But
this is not working.
But that's alongside the question of how do you understand the situation? What kind of analysis do you have of what you're up against? And so, but in the end, it's like the conclusion of a practical Aristotelian syllogism. Way of life.
But not a problem. Talk is cheap. Talk is cheap.
Well, you need to talk in order to clarify what you're going to do. But if it's not tied to what you're going to do, then it's still relatively empty. So you're right about that. Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Hi, I'm Nora currently.
How you doing?
And I really enjoyed your speech. It was great. I'm an Arab American and I'm first generation. I'm really happy to be a citizen of this country and thankful for that, but unfortunately I'm kind of growing up in a time period that's has this rampant Islamophobia, and just I've ran into a lot of things that have been really disheartening for me and my family. And I was just wondering what kind of advice you had to young people in minority groups and events. Obviously for me this is personal, but in general, that want to make a difference in this grassroots type of way in their community without being called un-American or unpatriotic just for wanting to speak out against, this ignorance and stereotypes.
So one is that I think you want to let people know that you are against injustice. You're against ignorance. And that's true whether you live in any country, no matter what. And so that's different than anti-American. You're anti-injustice in America, anti-ignorance in America. And you accent the breakthroughs when Americans of whatever color make breakthroughs with regard to justice, and you understand it as part of the larger public conversation. And that you enter as human beings, Arab American, citizens, and so forth. You might be religious, I don't know what that's true or not. Either way, we all have multiple identities, right? Don't be discouraged because every group who come to America has had to deal with xenophobia. You know that. You know the Catholics had to deal with vicious forms. Our Italian brothers and sisters, Irish brothers and sisters, they were called the white niggas. I mean, black folk always the point of reference because we at the back of the Jim Crow bus. But they pushed Jews back there. The Jews didn't want to go up in front with the Goya, you know. No, well, we're not black, we're not white, we're white. Rosenberg. That's what I am. I'm used to being the underdog in Jew-hating Europe. But I come to America, and my God, I've got something new. There's the folk who hate it more than they hate me. They still hate me. They don't hate me as much. They come on the teacher. So I got to decide. Am I going to be white-knives as a Jewish brother and sister? Or will I stay true to the best of my tradition, which is justice, 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 what I was talking about for orphan and widow. And that's the choice people make. Some Jewish brothers and sisters went one way. I'm going to make it at any cost. Other Jewish brothers and sisters, lukewarm. I know the right thing, but I don't have time. Other Jewish brothers and sisters, I'm going to be true to what my grandparents taught me about justice, whatever cost. That's true for any community. Be deferential to the larger society. Arab Americans will find the same thing. You'll find some Arabs completely assimilated to the mainstream. Some who are lukewarm, some who are going to hold on to the best of the culture that they bring. If it's Islam, it's going to be prophetic Islamic brothers and sisters. Like Lupe, who's Muslim, like Brother Ali, who's Muslim, like the later Malcolm X, who's Muslim. There's a whole tradition in America for prophetic Muslim folk, even before our precious Arab brothers and sisters got here, or those from the Middle East who got here. But you want to be part of a network too. Right here at the university. Make sure your organization has dialogues and forums with other groups. You talk about the Middle East, Israeli, Palestinian, have a dialogue with Jewish brothers and sisters across the board. This is where we agree. This is where we disagree. And you see overlap. You'll see difference. That's very important. That's what the democratic process is all about. Beginning with an answer.
My question is, how do you see the role of the unions today in fighting the war against poverty? And in particular, how do we who are active in the union movement convince our working brothers and sisters we are not the enemy?
Yeah, wonderful question. You know, there's a marvelous essay by our brother Harold Myers in the recent issue of the American Prospect. And it's really about what America would look like if unions continue to decline or even disappear. And it's a nightmare. Countervailing force against the rule of plutocrats and oligarchs and capital. And then analysis of what's going on inside of the labor movement and all of its various streams and strains. Some of it narrow forms of trade unionism, others more social forms of trade unionism, others more engaged in anti-poverty activity within the trade union movement. And that dialogue and that battle going on is a very, very crucial one. You get the attack on the trade union movement, and then the internal debate that's going on. And for me, I'm thoroughly convinced that if the trade union movement does not bounce back in a significant way, then the possibility of transforming America less and less and less. Now, of course, you got public sector workers versus private sector workers. Public sector workers, very strong. Private sector, more right to state. The right to work states, weaker, we're with 6.9%. Smaller and smaller and smaller. But I mean, that's the beginning of an answer to your question. But I just happened to read that on the plane last night. I flew all night last night, so I haven't slept for 2 days, but I'm still feeling good. But that's a powerful piece. That's a powerful piece.
How you doing? Doing good. First, I want to say that it's truly an honor to hear you speak here today, especially with the debate coming up. You brought up a point about the Occupy movement and how they try to kind of point out the flaws that Wall Street is kind of taking control of the government, and I kind of thought of a bit of like Plato's allegory of the cave, where one group of people kind of come out and try to pull the rest of society out of the cave, but instead of listening to them, they kind of badger with them. And especially now, with the whole federal government that's being controlled by, you know, Wall Street and big banks that can't even agree with each other, and then you have the Occupy movement where they just get completely dismissed. And so, I guess my initial question is, what do you think it'll take, especially in the society that we're in now, to kind of pull the powers that be out of the cave and get them to kind of see the light?
Well, I'll tell you, brother, well, let me first say this, that you're absolutely right that Plato's Republic in chapter 7 that you're alluding to has a notion of awakening in paideia called paradoxy, which is the turning of the soul. There's the turning of the soul, the turning away from what Plato believed to be darkness. He thought it was the world of becoming, the world of light, the world of being. And therefore, he did see education at its deepest level, requiring fundamental transformation. The problem, as you know, emerging out of that cave, is only the philosopher king. It's a small, small slice of folk at the top. And they become the figures who have both philosophical knowledge and political power. So he ends up producing a thorough authoritarian regime rather than democratic. And Plato hated democracy. That was a regime that put to death Socrates. And for him, every democracy would be characterized by unruly passion and ubiquitous ignorance. Now, when you look at America, do we have a lot of unruly passion? Yeah. Do we have a lot of ignorance? Yeah. So Plato's critique is one you have to wrestle with, even though I don't accept his conclusion. He's a profound critic of democracy. And if you don't minimize the ignorance and channel the passion in the right ways, you lose your democracy. You end up with authoritarian. So he's right in terms of his critique. I think he's wrong in terms of the overall solution. So for us, it's a matter of the demos among the poor and working people, especially to wake up. Plato didn't want that. And we believe, as deep Democrats, small d, that awakening can, in fact, make a better democracy. John Dewey used to say, much of the crisis of democracy is when there's not enough democracy, when poor people's voices are not heard. When working people's voices are not heard, not just in the ballot booth, but in the workplace. And that is the kind of leap of faith that deep Democrats like myself make. It's through deep education, it's through political awakening, it's through a kind of a renaissance of compassion, renaissance of justice. And we saw it in the abolitionist movement, we saw it in the feminist movement, we saw it in the Black freedom movement in the 60s, we saw it in various trade union moments in history, trade union, and so forth and so on. And if we don't have that, Occupy will attempt to make that real. If we don't have that kind of renaissance, then we're in very, very deep trouble. So Plato is always useful because he's profound, but because he's usually wrong, he's not worthy of following. There's a difference when you're a profound thinker. You got a lot of resources that you can use. But that doesn't mean that you are analytically correct. You can learn a whole lot from folk who have rich resources, but you don't necessarily have to reach their conclusions. But I appreciate that, the reference and the importance of the emerging out of this cave. Absolutely. Yes, go right ahead.
Good evening. My name is Natalia. I have a personal question. I would like to know how your Christianity has affected your views and your lifestyle on poverty and activism.
Oh, I appreciate it. No, it's fundamental. It's fundamental. That to be a Christian is to attempt to love your way through the darkness of a world that's characterized by cycles of hatred, revenge, domination, and oppression. And the only way to break that cycle is through a witness of love and justice that appears to be absurd and folly in the eyes of the world, but that folly constitutes a form of Christian wisdom. And what appears to be impotent constitutes a form of Christian witness for love. And so you cut him radically against the grain. You're in the world, but not of it. And you have a standard and authority that's different from whatever the populace says. And as the brother asked, what you're willing to do. And if you're going to follow, you got to deny yourself, pick up your cross. I didn't say wave your flag. I said pick up your cross and bear witness. Wave the flag and the cross. So I'm highly suspicious of any flag waving. Whoever waves the flag. Not because the flag doesn't have significance, not because people have not courageously struggled in the name of that flag, sometimes for democracy, sometimes for autocracy, but it's still not an internationalism, because the cross represents unarmed truth and unconditional love. No one ever gets to that truth and that love, but you are forever striving because you have been empowered by these stories and an experience that changed your life, and therefore whatever people say and do and attempt to deter you, you smile, try to preserve a little style, bear with it, and be willing to do that. That's what it is.
Hi, first I'd like to thank you so much for speaking here and for your truly inspirational words. Before you mentioned white supremacy in human beings and it resulting in low self-esteem among minorities and blacks in looks and intelligence. And I was just wondering what you thought the steps were to realizing one's self-worth.
What the steps to realizing one's self-worth?
Yeah, in the beginning process, at least.
Yeah, I think that first one has to fundamentally believe that white supremacy is a lie. It's a vicious lie. And it not only has done damage, continues to do damage, so you have to point out that lie and then try to extricate it out of one's own soul, because it's been hammered from the very day one burst out of one's mother's womb in America. And that's true even with a black president now. Because some folks go, oh yes, now we have a black president, we're no longer racist. No, America's still deeply racist. America's just less racist than it used to be. And you don't give moral prizes for people who are just less racist than their grandma. You don't get Nobel Prize because you're less racist than uncles who are less than black people. Voted for black president, that's wonderful. He was the best one, man. Sure one. You know, black folk voted for Steve Cohen in Memphis. Memphis is chocolate to the core. 80% black, they've been voting for a white Jewish brother every 2 years. How come? Black folk got critical reflection. Other black folk run against Steve Cohen, they not the best. They vote for Steve Cohen. Now, do people give black people a standing ovation for voting for a white Jewish brother against black candidates? No. They just shouldn't. That's normal. That's just being human, right? And so a lot of white brothers go, oh, you know, I've done my duty now. I think I've got that beautiful black family daddy. Black folk don't have to ask me for nothing. What's he doing there? And the fact that white supremacy still operates inside all of us to some degree. Some degrees. We got to fight it daily. Black folk, especially, because see, when we fight it daily, by example, it can become contagious. And just other black folk, but other white brothers and yellow, red brothers as well. So that's the beginning of the answer to that. Now, you know, Malcolm X is the autobiography. That's the important part of the text. The rest of it, how he does it. Gangster Malcolm Little, the prophetic figure, Malcolm X, and then ends up humanist Malcolm X. But if he didn't have the love of Elijah, he would have stayed a gangster Malcolm Little. Malcolm loved that Negro. Loved a whole lot of white supremacy out of him. And then he had to outbroke Elijah. He said, no, white brothers and sisters, not devils. There's some of them still enact a lot of devilish behavior. That's a different kind of claim. We got empirical evidence for that. And that's how Malcolm was growing, expanding, deepening. It took courage to do that with Socratic as well as prophetic within the Islamic context. But keep track of the love. That's the key. Keep track of that love. When you love yourself, it's hard for everybody to come to you and fully colonize yourself.
Okay, we're going to keep this moving very fast because we're on a time crunch here. So ask your question and then
Thank you, Dr. West, for your speech, but for helping to restore humanity. My question is, so often in K-12 education, curiosity, free thought, and the concept of critical reflection that you so humanely pointed out earlier are diminished and trampled upon. And I wonder, what do you have to say about how we could go about fixing that? Because it has to start from the bottom. Because if our young aren't moving forth, then I don't know what.
You're talking kindergarten, pre-K, and so forth and so on. Yeah. I mean, there, part of it's a matter of our mass media, part of it's a matter of our elementary schools and junior highs and others. I mean, I think as students here at Hofstra, one of the things that one can attempt to do if you have time is to have some connection with a precious young person outside of Hofstra, as a mentor or a teacher, something that allows your perspective that's different from just what goes on in Hofstra. Because Hofstra is a wonderful place, but it has its own bubble-like quality. And you get outside of that bubble. It's very important. When I was in college, I spent a lot of time teaching in prison. I taught in prison about 34 years. It gave me a different perspective than just the academic perspective. That's important as the academic perspective. I know we did later appreciate that. Go right ahead, bro.
Good evening, Dr. Rose.
How you doing? Good to see you.
My name is Myron Mathis. I just wanted to ask you because, like, when I was younger, I struggled a lot with self-identity, being, having a black father and Asian mother and stuff like that. And that's why my favorite quote is Marianne Williamson's "Our deepest fear." Our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. It's that we're powerful beyond measure. Our light and our darkness that most frightens us. So my question to you is, how do you suggest the youth of America finds the motivation to reach their highest potential?
Appreciate that question and the honesty and heartfelt quality of your question. One is that, and you just say this, we can kind of look at each other. There you go. One is that it's very important that you do accept who you are in all of your preciousness and pricelessness. It's a very rich combination that you have, and even on your black side, there's probably a whole lot of mixture going on there too. Because when black folk, we intertwine with indigenous peoples and white brothers, sometimes under cruel conditions, the racial violation of black women, but all of us are who we are, and we accept that. We have to be true to ourselves, but true to ourselves in a critical way. That we're forever in a process of trying to become better. That's that dying in order to live. Right? Critically examining in order to be more mature, more courageous, more compassionate. But also noting that in the end, it's your human identity, and you're going to have a lot of other identities. Your regional identity, your religious and non-religious identity, your intellectual identity, all of them. Your identity because of what sports team you like. A lot of people invest a whole lot in these sports teams. They wanted to die for Washington so-and-so. I don't understand that kind of commitment, but it's real in the culture. A lot of identities are at work. And you are in the process of forging those identities in light of the particular human being that you were when you emerged from the womb. I think the crucial thing is to try to maintain the kind of rich relations with the people who shape you, so that you become empowered to shape others in a loving, courageous, and powerful way. Well, good luck with your we got four more, real quick.
My name is Samuel Jenkins. I really don't have a question for you, but I just wanted to say, everybody's asking questions, so thank you for talking and everything. And then what I've learned in my life is when you do great things, nobody really pays attention. So I wanted to know that the youth, me being young, like what you said touched me, or whatever, when I was in that, And so my major here is entrepreneurship. And then you was talking about how like Wall Street and all these moguls, how they get all this money and they try to pocket for themselves. Nobody really cares about the poor. Yeah, so I had a social entrepreneurship class. And what we did was we came up like with a business, try to help out young kids try to find their dreams. The name of the project was called DreamWorks.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and then I remember what you were saying how in Chicago, one of the 4 schools, they like arts programs and stuff like that. You know, they like creativity. They always trying to copy and not be their own. So what I was trying to say with what I'm doing with my degree here is try to like build a foundation so that other people could be their own instead of copying what.
No, but I think that's beautiful. My dear brother, I want to make a distinction, but I want to salute you the sense of commitment that you have. But there's a big difference between multinational corporations that are obsessed with just maximizing profits, as opposed to small businesses and entrepreneurs who are trying to survive and thrive and also connect with the community. And it's the latter that we need. It's the latter that we need. My dear sisters, go ahead.
Hi, Dr. West. My name is Elizabeth. Thank you for your enlightened message. It's very good. My question is simple, really. You know, your vision is to tell the truth and leave behind justice and love. And with regards to that, in light of tonight's presidential debate and subsequent ones, I'm wondering what truth do you hope that the American public sees tonight? What truth do you hope is illuminated by, you know, the questions that the moderator asked and by the way the candidate and the president presents himself in regards to their authenticity as contenders and their worthiness?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. It's twofold though. One is that, you know, the immediate issue is who's going to win between these 2 candidates. I mean, if I had a dream, it would be a president who was talking about issues of poverty and so forth. So you talk about Green Party, Jill Stein, about Johnson, Anderson, a lot of other folks who are trying to raise these issues. But it's clear they got the chance of a snowball in hand of winning. So the next president's going to be 1 or 2 of these. So for me, immediately is to ensure that some democratic possibilities can be accented with the next president. And that's why I'm very much more critical of Brother Romney than I am Obama in terms of the choice between the 2. Now, of course, there's a sense in which for me it's a choice between catastrophe and disaster for poor people. Because neither one I'm talking about. But disaster is better than catastrophe. Because with Romney, you're going to talk about millions of poor people who were pushed out, and under Obama, it's a few million. So you had to make a choice, you know what I mean? But it's the system. So the second point is, I would hope America would look at this and say, it's not just the brilliance of X or Y. Our system is broken down. We need somehow to transform. Let's get that big money out of politics. Let's be like Australia. 6 weeks, you must vote, so much money on the campaign. Let's have a dialogue, do away with the ads, and then proceed. And that would be ideal, but that is part of the awakening that I would like to see, because I do believe one of the first steps is getting that big money out of politics. So it frees them up. So you see, so the first one is the choice between 2, then the next one is the system as a whole.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Dr. West, thank you for being here this evening. In your address this evening, you mentioned how the United States is #1 in the country for providing education for the top 1%.
Yeah.
How do you rationalize that with your choice to distinguish yourself as a professor at Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, which caters to very few?
Well, the thing is, I appreciate that question. You know, I'm at Union Seminary now, and we just barely living along financially, but I appreciate your pleasant thoughts and your prayers and your religion. We just barely living. But you know, the Harvard, Yale, and Princeton certainly are formative sites for the ruling class in America, but it has significant middle class and stable working class representations because they're highly talented, highly disciplined folk who make it in these places have an impact. It's not just the 1% that you see when you go to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. So now it's true when it comes to the poor and very poor, they're very few. And as you know, all 3 have given free scholarships. So that, you know, if one does well, You don't ever have to worry about financial aid. You can be paid 100% if you're able to compete based on the test scores, the letters of recommendation, and so forth. But secondly, these are also places where you have a lot of time to get a lot of work done, so you can travel around the way I do and engage in reflection and writing and so forth. If I were in places where I had to teach 6 courses a year as opposed to 4 or even 3, I would have published 2 books rather than 20 and still be tired. And so part of that has to do with your calling. Part of that has to do with your calling. But I appreciate the question. I think it's a very important one. And I think that, as you know, in each one of these places, I mean, Ralph Nader went to where? Princeton. Edwards I.E., Princeton. Norman Mailer, all with Thomas Pynchon, Cornell. So these schools have histories of producing some great freedom writers and artists and intellectual, free thinkers in that regard. But of course, Princeton also produced George Schultz and some other folks. So we've got some serious balance. Rumsfeld, you know what I mean? Absolutely. One last question about this.
Hi, I'm Aziza. My question is regarding the future, since regarding poverty and tuition is on the rise. Yeah. How would I encourage those that I know that have younger kids that education is the best way to go, and no matter how expensive it gets, you need your education in order to shape this country better in the future.
You keep doing what you're doing, which is to say people must be invested in education and ideas no matter what the future looks like, and we're fighting to make the future better for young people no matter what. And the future is never determinate. It's open-ended. So we tell young folks, be disciplined, work hard, laugh hard, love hard, sacrifice, learn how to relate to others and be connected with the best of the past. And we're going to try to change the future. We have no guarantee, but we're going down fighting. Thank you so much.